All right. I was spanked as a child. And I really hate that word spank because it's a euphemism. It's avoiding what spanking actually is, which is beating your children. I I absolutely fucking hate the word spanking. And I will never use it whenever I am accusing my parents or telling other people what they did. I only use the word spanking because it's what it's called. It's how people justify beating their kids. So if I'm going to help end spanking, I'm unfortunately going to have to use the word spanking so people will know what I'm talking about and so it'll catch their attention. Um, yeah, because, I mean, it's like this. I've talked about this in my other videos, but it's the same thing with the word circumcision. It's a stupid fucking word that completely masks how horrendous the action behind the word actually is. You know, you're mutilating someone's genitals against their will when there's actually no medical issue at hand. Spanking is beating your children. It's beating your children. And the phrase I always come back to is if your children aren't old enough to understand what they did wrong, why would you spank them? And if your children are old enough to understand what they did wrong, why would you spank them? There's never a good reason. And if spanking is such an effective means of correcting behavior, why don't we just do that to other adults, you know? Why don't we do that in the workplace? Why don't we have a boss come and beat the ass of his subordinate whenever the subordinate underperforms on his metrics, you know? Why don't we do that if it's so effective? Because it's not effective, that's why. Because it destroys a person's sense of personhood, their own sense of identity. They don't feel safe in their own skin anymore. When I was spanked, my parents would take me into their bedroom. They would lock the door. They would bend me over the bed. They would force me to strip naked, revealing my bare buttocks to them. And then they would take a wooden spoon or a belt and beat my ass until I was wailing, crying, until they decided that it was enough. They would be counting. 1, 2, 3. Move your hand or I'm going to give you one more. 4, 5. Yeah, they would grab my hands. They would force my hands in front of me while they beat my ass. So they would force me to not defend myself. They would keep me from defending myself. Do you think that's an effective way to raise an independent and confident child? To raise an independent adult, an independent man? No, you're teaching me not to defend myself. You're teaching me to be submissive to authority figures. And I wonder why I was so afraid of authority for my whole life. I would get deathly afraid when I would have performance reviews with my boss, even though there was no threat of spanking. All through my childhood and adolescence, I didn't understand that, you know? I didn't understand that these people wouldn't beat me because the people that I had been taught to trust my whole life, my parents, the people I was supposed to trust the most, that were supposed to care about me, they were the ones who abused me and beat me and hit me more than anyone else. No one else did that to me. And so when you're a kid and you're being beat, like I was, you don't understand what you're doing wrong. I didn't understand what I was doing wrong. And as much as I try to remember those spankings, even with how traumatic they are, I try to remember what I did wrong, and I still cannot remember. I still can't remember what I did wrong because I don't think I ever knew what I did wrong. You know? Because if they... Explaining what I did wrong was never their priority. Their priority was to change my behavior quickly. They wanted to change my behavior. They wanted to control my behavior. They didn't care about how I felt. They didn't care what I was complaining about. All they cared was that I was bothering them. I was being a little bit too loud. I was being a little bit too autonomous, you know? God forbid a child complain about something that displeases them. I hate this notion that complaining is bad. No, complaining is how we have made progress through the past millennium and thousands of years of humanity. The only way things get better is when people complain and people decide that this isn't good enough. So teaching a child not to complain or to punish them for complaining is just teaching them that they shouldn't speak up for themselves. They shouldn't do anything if they think something is wrong, because they'll get hurt. Someone's going to spank them if they speak out. It enrages me beyond words, especially because my parents used spanking in a religious sense. They would justify it with, religion and Jesus, like spare the rod, spoil the child, and the books by James Dobson about the strong-willed child, about how, you should use a neutral object to spank your child. As if that helps. You're telling me it's better to spank your child with a wooden spoon as opposed to a hand? You're telling me there's a good object or a better object to beat your child with? I don't understand. It makes no fucking sense. There is no such thing as a good way to beat your child. There's no such thing as a good or better form of abuse. It makes no fucking sense. No, it makes no fucking sense. You're telling me beating your child with a wooden spoon is better? Better than what? Better than what? Is it better than just simply not beating them and talking to them and understanding their feelings and why they were complaining, why they were disobeying? My parents made such a big point about obeying them, but they never told me why I should obey them. They would say, oh, well, because I told you so, because I'm your mom, because I'm your dad. Okay, well, what happens if, I'm at school or later in life when someone says, hey, do this? Why? Because I told you to. Am I not being set up to be abused by other adults? Because you're using your authority as a justification for doing horrible things to me. Authority is no justification for abusing somebody. It's not. No matter what your position of power is, it never, ever, ever gives you the right to intrude on another person's autonomy or their personhood, especially not a child's. No, never. And maybe you are wondering, why am I so willing to talk about this openly? Because it's not my fault. It's not my fault. I will talk about it openly because it's not my fault. I didn't do anything wrong. Complaining is not bad. Disobeying is not bad. It's fucking stupid to obey if you're not given a reason why you should obey. Saying, do this because I told you so, is not a good reason. It's not a good fucking reason. No, because then you become a blind follower. You become blind. You do something just because someone tells you to do so. How does that ever grow someone into becoming a leader? It doesn't. It fucking doesn't. So, I know there's thousands of people there that were also spanked as a child. Stop using that word. You weren't spanked. You were beaten. You were abused. You were physically abused as a child. And aside from the brutality of being hit, you also have to take into account the element of embarrassment and humiliation that was there, because I was forced to get naked. I had to be naked. I had my penis and my testicles just hanging out, my bare ass exposed, while my parents would hit me with a wooden spoon or a belt. While they kept me from defending myself. They punished me for defending myself. I absolutely cannot fucking stand people that think this is beneficial. What is it beneficial for? Yes, I will not argue. I agree that it's beneficial for controlling behavior. Why do you want to control their behavior, though? Why are you so bothered by your kids? They've never existed before. They're trying to understand what's happening. They've never had parents before, okay? They're trying to understand what the fuck is happening to them. Yes, they're going to complain about things that are minor inconveniences to you because this is the first time they're experiencing that inconvenience. Is it not? I think without a doubt, it has to do with my parents' own abuse, but that's not an excuse. It doesn't matter. It's not even something that should come up, because you being abused doesn't justify abusing someone else. An eye for an eye makes the world go blind, does it not? But my parents, I'm not going to forgive them. My parents would always, I remember they sat down with us one time and they talked about how, their parents abused them, but they forgave their parents because that's what Christ would do. That's what Jesus would do. Who fucking cares what Jesus would do? Did Jesus get abused by your parents? Did Jesus get abused? By his parents? No, I don't think so. And even if he was, and he chose to forgive them, that doesn't mean I have to. That doesn't mean you have to. I don't give a fuck about what your religion says. It's a fucking fairy tale as far as I'm concerned. And, it would be really easy for me to be what they call, be mature, be grown about it. Move on, quit dwelling on it, is what people will tell me. I'm not gonna quit dwelling on it. It fucking ruined my life. From age 8 to about age 23, right now, I have lived my life in a constant state of anxiety and unease. I've constantly been on edge because I haven't understood why, And I've told myself for a long time that, I have good parents, because why? Because they housed me, fed me, and gave me water? That's why? Really? Really? There's a lot more to life than that. They weren't really being good parents. They were just keeping me alive. They were keeping me alive. That's not hard to do. You could put me in prison and they would be able to do that. Would they not? Put me in juvenile detention. I mean, I would have been so much better off with being raised, if I had been raised by robots, than if I had been with my parents. I mean, because all that a robot would have to do would be to not hit me. It's really not that hard. It's really not that hard. All you have to do is understand that this is a child that you're talking about. This is a child that you're hitting. It's a child. They don't understand what the fuck is going on. If they did, they probably wouldn't have displeased you. They wouldn't have done it if they knew they were going to displease you, because that's the last thing a kid wants to do. The last thing a kid wants to do is displease their parents. Why would I want to do that? I inherently love them. It's literally, even if I didn't want to, I wouldn't be able to not love them as a kid, because it's ingrained into me as a Homo sapien to fawn for the attention and care of my caregivers, but so that I can continue to be alive, and so they will continue to feed me. Because when I'm a child, I don't have another choice. I don't get to choose my parents. I don't get to just move out when I'm 9 years old and being spanked, abused, and beaten by my parents. I don't have an option. I have to fawn over them, or else I'm going to die. So it explains a lot of my behaviors for me, because I'm always looking to fawn or looking to gain the approval of someone, especially if they reject me or show a lack of interest, because that's what I had to do to survive my childhood. I had to fawn for the love of my parents so that they would continue to feed me and take care of me. Take care. Yeah. They did fucking nothing. And my parents were both deadbeats. Just because they weren't actively abusing drugs, and just because they were housing me, that doesn't mean that they weren't deadbeats. There's so much more to life than just being in the same house as your kid. There's so much more to it than that. I mean, when I look back on my childhood, I don't see my parents as anything more than chaperones or babysitters that were working 24-hour shifts, I mean, a lot of people can do what my parents did. There's thousands and thousands of people who are paid to take care of children and babysit them, But as a parent, you're supposed to go beyond that. The emotions of your child are your responsibility as a parent. You're supposed to teach them how to handle their emotions. If they're doing something that displeases you, you should let them know. But that doesn't mean you have to beat them. You can sit down and talk to them and understand where your child is coming from. Because guess what? Your child is not going to be exactly like you. This isn't fucking Build-A-Bear. Okay? Your job isn't to mold your child. If you simply just listen to your child, give them attention, care about their emotions, let them know that you want to know what's bothering them, they're going to grow up to be a great person. No well-raised person just grows up and decides they're going to start hurting people or become a criminal. That's a result of absent parents, emotionally absent parents, abusive parents, all of it. It's not natural for anyone to grow up and be like that. It's a sign of sickness. It's a sign of sickness. I don't know what my parents were so afraid of. I don't know why they felt like they had to hit me in order to control my behavior. I don't know why they thought that would be effective. I mean, you can look in to the greatest criminals in human history and look at their childhood. You don't think there's some correlation there between the violence that they committed as adults and the violence that was committed against them when they were a child? There is absolutely a correlation and a causation there. If someone knows that they have loving parents, a home, a safe place to go back to, a place where they're accepted, they won't have to fight for the validation or approval of other people. They won't have to get upset when other people reject or disapprove of them because they know that they're loved and cared for by their parents. And another thing that was confusing was my parents would tell me that they loved me. That's what was even more confusing. It's like, well, they love me and, they're hitting me, but this must be like a very complicated type of love. Maybe I'm doing something wrong. That was how I felt my whole life. I thought there was something wrong with me because I'm feeling these emotions, this anger, this repressed rage, this sadness, this depression. There must be something wrong with me. How could I be feeling like this? Because my parents love me. I mean, they told me they loved me. But there's a completely different... There's a huge difference between saying that you love someone and actually loving them. It's not hard to say that you love someone. It's only 3 words. It's not hard. Anybody can do that. A robot could say that. But are you going to do the actions that actually back it up? But whenever you're in the fog, whenever you're in that environment, you don't necessarily realize that there's anything wrong. Something feels unpleasant and painful, but you don't know why. And it's not until you move out completely, don't talk to your family for a year, and you reflect on everything, and you actually pay attention to your pain, and you realize that the pain doesn't hurt unless you don't want it to. Pain only hurts when you don't want it to. That's another big realization I've made. But I finally moved away. I grew up in Arkansas, Central Arkansas, for my whole life. And then I went to university in Arkansas. But then I finally decided, I wanted to leave, because even when I was in university, I was still seeing my family that lived in the college town I was in. And so I was still believing that there was something wrong with me instead of there being something wrong with my family. And so I eventually moved to Florida, and I just reflected on everything. And I was like, oh my God, I'm so much happier now. Why is that? I'm so much happier now that I'm not talking to my family. And I think I believed for a long time that there's something magical about family. Ohana means family, right? Why would I ever want to not be with my family? There's nothing magical about family. That's another one of those euphemized words, I think. It's just a group of humans, that's all, that decided to have kids. Anybody can start a family. It's not hard. It's not hard. Even maintaining the image of a family isn't hard. All you have to do is say, hey, let's meet here once a year at Christmas. Hey, look, we have a family, right? Technically everybody has a family, okay? But are you actually connected to your family? Do you have an emotional connection to the people that you're related to? Because that's what matters. You don't have to like your family. You can hate your family if you want to. You're not under any obligation to stay with your family or to give them any respect. It's not a contract. You can leave. But I didn't know that. I thought that family was like this root, the rock of my life, because you hear a lot of people talk about it. And I think it's really dangerous because there's nothing special about family. I mean, again, anybody can start a family. It doesn't mean you're in a good family. Certainly not. If there's bad people out there, there's definitely bad families. There's definitely families that are not worth being a part of. How do you know that's not your family? Because I realized that was the case for mine. Being a part of your family won't necessarily make you happier. It's not necessarily a good thing. But family always seems to have a positive connotation. And like when I tell people, oh, I don't talk to my family, or oh, I'm not going back home for the holidays, I'll kind of get a, oh, like, look, like, but why are you surprised though? Do people seriously think that everybody has a happy family, or a family worth being a part of, or a family worth visiting or talking to ever? No. No, it's not true. And you're going to waste a lot of time and energy trying to convince yourself that your shitty family is actually worth being a part of. It's not always the case. But if you're out there and you're a parent and you're thinking about spanking your child, you really need to ask yourself why. Why is this child bothering you so much that you have to hit them when you wouldn't even do that to a grown adult? But you're going to do that to a child? How does that make any sense? Another thing that was funny was how my dad would criticize, and my mom would criticize people who hit their pets, their pet dogs, because we adopted a dog that had been hit by its owners. And they would criticize and talk bad about those owners for hitting their dog. Meanwhile, they were hitting their children. So if you're a parent out there, why don't you beat your dog when your dog messes up? Why don't you beat your cat when your cat bothers you? When your cat pisses on the floor, why don't you beat it? Huh? Because it's funny, because my parents never did that. So why would you beat your kids? Like, the reason you don't beat your pets is because they don't know any better. Guess what? Your kids don't know any better either. They have underdeveloped brains. I mean, if you wouldn't beat a grown pet domesticated animal, why would you beat an undeveloped human? It makes no fucking sense. You're not going to beat your developed animals, but yet you are going to beat your undeveloped child. The reason that they're bothering you, how they're bothering you, is because they're undeveloped. They don't have an understanding of how the world works. They don't necessarily even understand that everyone else has feelings the same way they do. It's a growing and learning process. They don't understand or see the world the same way you do. You need to understand that if you're a parent. You need to learn to sympathize and get off your high horse, okay? Because I promise you that your child is not trying to get you to hit them. They're not trying to piss you off so much that you hit them. Why would a child do that? They don't understand, okay? Even if they say they do, they don't. They don't have a way to understand. Their brain is this big, okay? But I really hope this can start a movement. I hope someone can bring me on a podcast to talk about this, because I would love to talk about it. Because unfortunately, it's definitely still happening to this day, because parents think that it's helpful. Parents want to feel this sort of control. When they're beating their child, though, you're also beating someone that's going to be a grown adult. You're beating a future 80-year-old person. Okay, you need to think about it like that. This child is no less human than a grown adult. They're just as human. Just because they're underdeveloped, you think that they don't deserve to be treated well? That says a lot about your humanity and your morals, if you believe that. So if you're out there and you're going to hit your children because you think James Dobson is just a godsend, I think first you should start with beating your pets. After, of course, you start beating your subordinates at work. And after you beat your adult siblings for bothering you, do that too. Beat your parents for bothering you as well. I mean, why not? Then you can start to beat your children. Why don't you do that? See how nonsense it is? It makes no sense. It makes no fucking sense. And then parents will be surprised when one day their children no longer like them. That's how my parents were. They're like, oh, well, what do you want me to do about it now? It already happened, right? Are you fucking serious? And they're like surprised. Why don't you just talk to me on the phone? You don't deserve to hear my fucking voice. And my parents think that they're entitled to some sort of secrecy. No, I'm going to let every single person you know I'm going to let everyone you know what you did to me. Why shouldn't I let the rest of my family know how you hit me and abused me and beat me? What's the reason? Because it makes you uncomfortable? Because it would ruin your life? Well, guess what? You ruined my life. You ruined my life. I was in a deep depression for so many years. I hated life. I didn't even know how to be happy. All I knew was how to survive. I was surviving. My entire life I've been surviving. I lost out on so many experiences. Because even though I went to prom, I went to formal, I went to these dances at school, I went on these trips, I wasn't actually there. I was motivated by fear the whole time. I was constantly scared. I wasn't able to enjoy anything for most of my childhood and adolescence. And I completely hold that against my parents. I'm not going to forgive them. Forgiveness is such a cop-out sometimes. I mean, like, if you want to forgive your abusers, sure, go for it. But nobody is obligated to forgive anybody. You don't have to do that. And you might say, oh, well, that doesn't mean you need to get revenge. Why not? Why not? It doesn't mean I need to go and beat my parents necessarily. I know that an eye for an eye makes the world go blind, but it doesn't mean that there shouldn't be any repercussions, Why shouldn't I bring criminal or at least civil charges against them for ruining my life and driving me to the brink of suicide multiple times because I didn't feel at place in my own body? There's no good reason why I shouldn't get revenge in that sense. Nothing is bad 100% of the time. Revenge is not always bad. Not forgiving someone is not always bad. And I hate that it's not forgiving someone is seen as bad in like religious and spiritual circles, and choosing to hold a grudge that's bad. No. Learning that my parents are to blame for 99.9% of the problems I have experienced in my life, for 99% of the pain and trauma and unhappiness I've experienced in my life, to know that they're the ones responsible for all that, it makes me feel alive. It makes me feel great to know that it's not my fault. It feels great. Just like Robin Williams told Matt Damon in Good Will Hunting, it's not your fault. It wasn't my fault. And that feels so great to be able to place this blame on someone besides myself, because it was never my fault that I felt this way. It was never my fault. So yes, I am going to hold a grudge against them, because beforehand, I was just holding a grudge against myself, okay? Someone is going to be to blame. I don't know why I'm holding this. But someone is to blame, okay? There's nothing wrong with allocating blame. There's nothing wrong with holding a grudge. That's healthy. That's how I keep from the same pain being caused to me again, right? I mean, when countries do terrible things to people in war, do you just forget about it? Do you just forgive them and forget about it? No. No. Is it wrong to hold a grudge against another country that wronged your country? No. No. You shouldn't just forget about the past. We have memories for a reason. There's a reason we evolved to have memories, because it keeps you from causing more pain to yourself and to other people. So if I just let this grudge go and I just choose to forgive my parents and forget about it, I'm basically okaying what they did and saying that, oh, well, maybe beating me was actually good, Maybe it was actually a good thing. No. My emotions of hatred and anger deserve just as much attention as my emotions and feelings of happiness and excitement and sadness. All of my emotions deserve the same amount of attention. They're all there to protect me. They're all there as a part of myself. So if I just decide to leave some emotions behind, I'm going to be leaving behind a part of myself. Anger is there for a reason. You have all of your emotions for a reason. Anger is there to help you defend yourself and separate yourself from people who are going to cause harm to you. It doesn't mean that you being angry is going to result in you harming other people. You can be angry without doing anything with the anger. You can just sit there and feel it. Just because I'm angry doesn't mean I'm going to go and be violent. No. That's just a poor lack of understanding with how emotions work and separating emotions from actions. Actions won't necessarily resolve any of your emotions, but that doesn't mean you shouldn't take any action, though.